Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and you saw from the introduction. Today I'm going to be showing you how to build and the parts I chose for a $600, £500 gaming PC build for the months of October, November and December 2016. This would be a great Christmas present for someone, a great New Year's gift or something to save up for from Christmas, just something to use over the Christmas period, a really solid gaming PC. This video will be constructed of three sections. The first, the parts I chose for this build and why I chose them. The second, a full-fledged tutorial of how to build this gaming PC, and thirdly, some performance benchmarks. So you can click the links in the description to skip to different parts, or also they'll be on your screen now as well. Let's kick the parts off with the CPU. For the CPU, I chose AMD's Athlon X4 860K. Not only is the CPU clocked nice and high out of the box, it's also overclockable, which means you can send more power to it and get some more free performance if you wish. Not only that, it's also a quad-core CPU, meaning it's compatible with all of the latest AAA titles. We're talking GTA 5, The Witcher 3, Overwatch, Star Wars Battlefront, Battlefield 1, Battlefield Hardline, Battlefield 4, a load of games, even the new Call of Duty games, Infinite Warfare. You've also got COD 4 Remastered. This is going to smash those titles, a really solid CPU, and it comes in at, once again, a great price point. In terms of the CPU cooler, this is the first place you could save money if you're on a tighter budget. This build is quite easily capable of being pushed down to about $450, $500 if you did leave the CPU cooler out. Don't get me wrong, the CPU cooler is going to be a nice addition. It's going to keep the temperatures of your CPU down. It's very much so suited to the case we've gone for, because it will basically take the air in from the front of the case and push it through the back of the case like an air tunnel, meaning once the air has gone through the radiator, cooling that liquid, cooling your CPU, all it's then got to do is passively cool your motherboard, VRMs and any storage. So I would recommend this, but if you are on a tight budget, it isn't 100% necessary because you can use the stock cooler. Cooler Master were kind enough to send this over for this build. In terms of motherboard, this is a second place. You could save a little bit of money if you wished. I reached out to Gigabyte and was like, yo, Gigabyte, I'm going to be building a gaming PC. I'd love if you could send some stuff over and help me out. They sent me their A88X. It's a Gigabyte Mini ITX motherboard with the FM2 Plus socket. This is their slightly higher end ITX board. It's got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity built in, which is a great feature. It's on that higher end chipset, giving you more SATA expansion, a better I/O. It's also capable of handling APUs as well, so if you didn't have a graphics card, you could have something like an A8 or an A10. Something like AMD sent me an A10 7870K. It's all very possible in this board. It's a solid board, and I'll leave alternatives along with this in the description below. In terms of memory, all you really need is 8GB of RAM. I had some crucial stuff lying around that they sent me ages ago, if I can even speak, so I used that. But I also leave some alternatives in the description below if you would like to save a little bit more money once again. Next up is storage. I just went for a 1TB hard drive, kept it nice and simple. You could add an SSD in to increase boot times, decrease boot times, and I'll leave a link to one of those as well. However, the hard drive is really all you need. It's got 1TB of capacity, meaning you've got loads of room for your Steam games, your movies, your music, Origin libraries, all that good stuff. You've got plenty of room on this drive, and it's 7200 RPM, which is more than fast enough. The WD Blue 1TB. In terms of the graphics cards, I went with one of AMD's brand new offerings, an RX 470, this one from ASUS, the ASUS Republic of Gamers Strix RX 470. They were once again kind enough to send this over, so a huge thank you out to ASUS, and you can view my review of that card in the card section now as well if you wish. It's a really solid card. You can also see some performance benchmarks as well in that video along with the end of this episode. In terms of the case, I kept it nice and simple. Cooler Master's Elite 130 is not only cheap, it just looks good in my opinion. It's nice and simple. I also did a review of this a little while back, so you can check that out in the card section as well. It's a really nice case. It's got support for full-size ATX power supplies, up to 3 hard drives and SSDs. You've also got a really nice wind tunnel design, support for very long graphics cards, mini ITX motherboards, and a load of room for cable management, even if there aren't that many pre-built cable management runs. In terms of the power supply, I went for Corsair CX430M. It's just another case of what I had lying around. However, this power supply has actually been discontinued, so I'll leave a link to an actual better power supply that's actually cheaper, EVGA's 430 or 500 watt in the description below. All you really want is something with an 80+ bronze certification or an 80+ certification, something with between 450 and 500 watts. This isn't a particularly power consumptive system, just something that's preferably semi-modular, but but it doesn't really matter. Just something that will do the job, and what I've linked in the description will certainly do so. But that wraps it up for the parts I've chosen. Let's pop straight into the tutorial and show you how to build this truly insane PC, starting off with case prep. With this being a mini ITX case, there are a few quirks. Firstly, unscrew the power supply holder from the rear of the case, identifying the top. Take your power supply and screw it into the bracket. Don't put the bracket in yet, just leave this PSU and bracket assembly to one side, you will need it later. Next, take the I/O shield from the motherboard. This is the metal plate that labels all the ports. Clip it into the rectangular cutout at the back of the case and clip in the 4 corners. The writing and any colours should face the outside of the case, and the headphone and audio port on the left hand side when looking at the case from the rear. Now grab the 4 brass standoffs that come in the bag with your case. These raise your motherboard above the metal housing of the case to stop it from grounding out. Whilst Cooler Master don't pre-install the standoffs, they do include a tool which allows you to install them with a Phillips head screwdriver. Mini ITX motherboards being the smallest only take 4 screws, 1 at each corner. The screw holes are in the case for us under the power supply area. Simply align the brass standoffs and tighten using the tool. That's it, the case prep is now out of the way. Time for the motherboard assembly. Take the CPU, in this case AMD's Athlon X4 860K. Pull up the arm on the socket and align the golden triangle on the CPU with that other plastic one on the motherboard. The golden pins on the bottom of the CPU are very fragile, so don't touch these. These will slot down into the holes on the motherboard socket. Then pull down the retention arm and that's it. Don't force it, and the CPU should be flush to the socket prior to pulling the arm down. Now it's RAM time. In this case I'll be using 8GB of crucial RAM. Find the notch in the RAM and align it with the notch on this Gigabyte ATX motherboard. Unclip the clips on the RAM DIMM slots and slot the RAM in. Apply even pressure to each side, preferably using both hands, and that's it once again. It will clip in and the 2 clips go under the notches at the sides of the RAM. Now it's time for the CPU cooler. We need to install this before we install the motherboard into the case, as we need access to the back of the board. Take the CPU cooler, and I hate to say it, but you will need to look at Cooler Master's manual for this one. The CPU of CPU coolers varies on a socket to socket basis. For FM2+, we need to flip the backplate, this large metal piece, to the AMD side. Next, take the screws, the ones with completely blank unscrewable heads. Slot these through the appropriate holes as instructed in the manual and slide the little black plastic stoppers over. Remove the existing mounting hardware, just these 2 plastic bits off the motherboard, and the existing backplate on the motherboard will pop off. Slot the 4 screws that we just installed on the backplate through the now apparent holes on the motherboard. Take the appropriate brackets, once again as instructed in the CPU cooler instructions, and screw these into the CPU block. Grab the tube of thermal paste which came with your cooler and syringe the same amount as a grain of rice on your CPU. This will be the link between the CPU and the plate on the CPU cooler. You want enough to effectively conduct heat between the two, but any more than this will lead to poorer performance and unnecessary spillage.
That's what she said!
Take the CPU block and place it through the 4 screws, the ones sticking out of the motherboard. The CPU cooler comes with nuts. Screw these onto the top of the screw over the CPU cooler, tightening them in a diagonal cross pattern. Make sure these are tight enough for the CPU block to be secure, and that's it. But if there's any problems, please do refer to the manual, as this does vary on a CPU cooler, socket to socket, CPU to CPU basis. Now we need the screws that look like this, 4 of them to be precise, to screw the motherboard in. Take this slow as the CPU cooler and radiator are attached. The motherboard I/O needs to be first slotted through the I/O shield at the back of the case. Try not to put unnecessary strain on the radiator of the CPU cooler. You may be able to rest this on a part of the case for now. The motherboard holes on each corner should then be lined up for the brass standoffs. You may need to push it through the I/O shield and hold it there in order to screw these in. Take the screws from a moment ago and screw them through the hole in the motherboard to the brass standoffs. As before, do this in a diagonal cross pattern to ensure everything's as tight as one another and no over tightening happens. Now we need to screw the radiator in. Take the front panel off the case. You may need to add a little bit of force, but this should pop right off. There are 4 plasticky screws that go through the fan and the case at the front. We won't be using this fan or those screws, so take those out and remove the fan. Next, take one of the radiator fans that came with the CPU cooler and one of the long screws with a thumb grip at the end, which came included with the CPU cooler, and hold the fan on the front of the radiator. These screws will not only install the fan to the radiator, but also install the radiator into the case, and this is the fan that's going in between the radiator and the front panel of the case. Take the other included fan and the same screw type as before and screw that into the back. The angle of the tubes and the water block may need adjusting, but routing tubes is fairly simple. Remember, the power supply will mount it above the water block so the tubes cannot intrude into that area. At the front where we've installed those screws, make sure they go through properly the bracket on the front of the case and are nice and secure. Next up, we're going to plug in some of the wiring before it all gets cramped and tricky. Take the fan leads and plug them into the fan headers on the motherboard. They look like this. Next, grab the motherboard manual and go to the page labelled front panel connectors. These are small cables for the power and reset switches, hard drive activity LED and power LED. These go on the pins on the motherboard. Ensure the positive end is going to the positive pins and the negative connectors to the negative ones. Don't panic, however, if it doesn't go quite right, nothing's going to blow up. You'll just have to go back and redo this bit. You probably won't use all the pins either. Now take this HD audio connector and plug it into this connector. It has a pin blocked out and will only go in one way, so once again, don't force it. It's the same case for USB 2. Take the connector and plug it into a connector on the motherboard that looks like this. Finally, for USB 3, this is the largest of our connectors so far and is keyed, so once again will only go in one way. There is a pattern occurring here. Do not force this either. Installation is simple, it clips in like any other cable ever. Next up is the power supply. Just to recap, we've done the RAM, CPU, motherboard, case prep, some wiring and installed the CPU cooler. We've already installed the PSU into the housings, which is as simple as feeding the power supply cables through and screwing the bracket into the back of the case using the same screw type as those used to attach the shield to the power supply. Ensure the side marked top is in fact at the top, and I would recommend having the power supply fan face into the case to act as an exhaust from air pulled in by our intake fans at the front, creating kind of an air tunnel. You may also need to install some extra cables to the PSU, in this case a GPU power cable and SATA power harness for our hard drive. Add these into the appropriate connectors on the power supply and move these to the side. Now the biggest connector of all, the 20+4 pin motherboard power connector. This has 8 pins seen as squares on the end of the connector and powers the motherboard along with different bits and bobs connected to it. Next is the 4+4 pin CPU header. This powers the CPU and is plugged into the motherboard. Some motherboards will take 8 pins, 2 of the 2 4-pin blocks. This one, however, only takes 1. It's as simple as taking either of the 2 4-pin blocks and plugging them in. It is advisable to tuck extra cable slack away or use the cable ties to tuck the cables up somewhere. Next, take a SATA cable that looks like this, and we'll use this to connect to our hard drive to our motherboard for the transfer of data. Leave the other connector loose at the moment. That's going to be used later on once we get around to installing the hard drive. We will just plug in one end in for now to the motherboard while we can before things get even more cramped. Next up is the GPU, and screw the bracket here. This is where the GPU I/O will go. Push the notch on the PCI slot down and align the PCB of the GPU with the slot. It's as simple as pushing it down. The I/O should go nicely where we just remove the bracket, and the retention clip on the PCI slot will pop back up. Now align it with the screw holes on the top of the brackets and screw the GPU in with the thumb screws. Whilst these are called thumb screws, I would recommend taking a screwdriver to these to make sure they're nice and tight. Take the 6-pin GPU power cable, the only 6-pin connector here, it's one group of 6, one of the modular cables included with the power supply, and clip it into the GPU. This will give our GPU the extra power that it needs. All that's left to do now is the installation of our hard drive. You'll need this rubber washer and 2 SSD screws provided in the bag labelled SSD screws, along with 2 hard drive screws. The 2 hard drive screws will go in the bottom of the drive with the SSD screws in the side. I'll be mounting this hard drive in the optical drive area for easiness, but this case does give extra options. Take the 2 rubber washers and slot these into the hard drive slots on the optical cage. Line the hard drive holes up and screw in. These screws on the side should now be lined up, so screw these in also. Take the other end of the SATA data cable and clip that into the data connection. It will only go in one way, so once again, don't force it. finally we need to install a SATA power cable, another modular cable for our PSU, and this doesn't give a satisfying click when it goes in, so a bit more pressure will need to be applied, just don't force it. But that's all, screw it in, screw the outer panel back on and relax, sorry. Your Beast PC is now built. You'll need a copy of Windows, and like everything else, I'll link it in the description below. Now for some benchmarks. How does this perform? This is incredible. 1080p is going to be the sweet spot for this. You're looking medium to high settings whilst achieving at 45 to well over 60 frames per second. I do hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, I would urge you to drop a like rating down below. It just bumps this up in like search rankings and that kind of thing. And please do subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. Once again, a huge thank you to the people that helped make this possible: ASUS, Cooler Master, Gigabyte, and Crucial, who sent over some stuff a little while back. Please note that the links in the description below, the Amazon links, are affiliate links, meaning a small commission is made by me from those links. Just something I wanted to mention in aid of transparency. But as always, we will see you in the next GeekaWhat video.